Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different, maybe digging deeper than just what's on our plates.
Yeah, we're moving past just eating food.
Right. We want to really get into the value, the skill, and frankly, the sheer hard labor involved in actually producing and preparing food.
Labor that, I think it's fair to say, the modern industrial system has made almost completely invisible. It
Yeah.
just, you buy it, it's there.
Exactly. It feels like magic sometimes, doesn't it? Convenient, maybe, but it hides so much.
It really does. And our mission today is to, well, pull back that curtain. We want to look at the hands that work the soil, the care that went into it, the whole process.
And maybe uncover some of the joy in that process too. It's not all just toil.
That's a key part of it. Reclaiming these skills, this connection, and it offers something profound, something beyond just, efficiency, a real sense of accomplishment.
So for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a range of sources. We've got firsthand accounts from people actually working the land, like Barbara Kingsolver and James Rebanks, really personal stuff.
hmm And we're pairing those with some detailed histories of industrial food production, looking at how we got here.
Plus some practical guides, old cookbooks, preservation manuals, even soil science texts. It gives us this great contrast, right? The industrial versus the hands-on.
It really does.
hmm
And to understand this split, this divergence between local reality and global demand, you have to go back surprisingly far.
We're starting with tobacco. Seems like an odd place to start for food labor.
Well, it's a perfect early example of consumer preference driving production away from local resources. Think about Jamestown, early colonial Virginia.
Okay, John Rolfe, right.
Yeah, that's the guy. So the Virginia Indians were growing a local tobacco, Nicotiana rustica.
And the English colonists.
They hated it. And you can't say it was awful stuff. Poor and weak and have a biting taste. Just not what they were used to or wanted.
So it was there, it was local, but they didn't like the taste.
Exactly. And Rolf's solution wasn't, selective breeding or figuring out how to process it differently. He just imported something else entirely.
He brought in seeds from the Caribbean.
From Trinidad and Venezuela, yeah, for Nicotiana tobacco. And that stuff was described as pleasant, sweet, and strong. It hit the spot for the European palate.
And that single decision, prioritizing imported taste over local availability.
It set a huge precedent. It basically told producers, forget what grows easily here, forget local subsistence, focus on what the distant paying consumer desires, find the most profitable thing for the international market.
It shifted the entire economic rationale away from the local ecology and local labor.
Absolutely. It disconnected production from place right from the start. And that's the foundation, really, for the industrial food system we have today. It's all about meeting that abstracted consumer demand, often at great cost.
Okay, so let's unpack that modern system, because understanding this huge impersonal machine is key to understanding why people are pushing back, why they're seeking out that hands-on connection we talked about.
Right. It's the backdrop against which this reclaiming of skills is happening.
We usually think of the Green Revolution after World War II, with the chemical fertilizers and high-yield crops.
And that was huge, definitely. But our sources point to an earlier revolution, maybe just as profound, that really set the template. And that was about nitrogen.
Guano, the bird droppings from South America.
Exactly that. When shiploads of guano started arriving in Europe and North America in the mid-19th century, it fundamentally changed agriculture.
How so? It's just fertilizer, isn't it?
Well, before guano, fertility depended on really complex local cycles. You needed manure from animals, you needed nitrogen-fixing legumes, you needed to let fields lie fallow. It was all about careful management of the farm ecosystem itself.
Okay, so it's integrated.
Very integrated. Guano broke that link. Suddenly you could just import fertility. You could treat the land like an inert medium.
Yeah.
Just dump massive amounts of nitrogen onto it from thousands of miles away.
It removed the need for that local knowledge, that careful cycling.
Precisely. The goal shifted. It wasn't about nurturing the soil's long-term health anymore. It became about maximizing short-term output, extracting as much as possible this season.
And that model, that external input model, is what enables massive monocultures, right? Growing just one crop over huge areas.
Absolutely, because you're no longer relying on complex rotations for fertility or pest control. You can just pour on the nitrogen and pesticides needed for that one crop, destined for a global market, not necessarily the local community.
And while this industrialization was happening out in the fields, something similar was happening in the kitchen, wasn't it? A kind of outsourcing of skill.
Oh, definitely. The drive for speed and convenience began to erode traditional cooking labor. Think about the difference between historic cooking and how we often approach it now.
You mean like complicated techniques versus just, say, boiling something quickly?
Exactly. Our sources mention how the French culinary tradition sometimes looks down on simple boiling, they called it à l'anglaise, cooking in the English style, and saw it as demonstrating a kind of intellectual poverty.
Intellectual poverty. That's harsh, because it doesn't require much thought or skill.
Pretty much. It lacks the nuance, the constant judgment, the layering of flavors and textures you get in techniques like braising or careful roasting. But the modern mantra became, get it over with quick, speed above all else.
And there's a hidden cost to that speed, isn't there? Especially when it comes to family life.
One source argues quite powerfully that if that get it over with quick mentality defines how a family feeds itself, something really precious collapses. The shared time, the ritual, the connection around preparing and eating food, it just evaporates.
Even small inventions chipped away at the need for hands-on knowledge, like the oven thermometer.
That's a perfect example. Invented around 1902.
Mm.
Before that, experienced cooks relied on feel, on intuition, maybe putting a hand in the oven to judge if it was a moderate or a quick oven. It was sensory knowledge.
The thermometer took the guesswork out, which sounds like a good thing. Less anxiety.
Oh, for sure. It reduced anxiety for many. But it also meant you didn't need to develop that intuitive skill anymore. You just had to read a dial. It standardized the process, removed the need for that direct tactile judgment. And that pattern repeats throughout the industrial food system.
And that convenience, the speed, the standardization, it all comes at a human cost. The labor that makes cheap, convenient food possible is often incredibly harsh. We have to talk about that hidden side.
We really do. The sources are quite graphic about the conditions. Take industrial slaughterhouses. The pressure is immense. Supervisors are described almost like little dictators.
Pushing for speed above all else.
Constantly. Line speeds are incredibly high. One example mentioned is a worker at a gut table.
Mhm.
Their job is eviscerating carcasses, being expected to handle 60 cattle an hour.
60 an hour, that's one per minute. How can anyone work safely or carefully at that pace?
They often can't. Properly removing the stomach and intestines without spilling the contents, which is crucial to avoid meat contamination, apparently takes about 6 months to master under normal conditions.
But they don't get 6 months at that speed.
No. So inexperienced workers, or even experienced ones under pressure, frequently spill stomach contents. One source cited inspections at major plants where the spillage rate at the gut table could be as high as 20%. 20% of carcasses potentially contaminated because the line is moving too fast.
That's staggering. And what happens if a worker gets injured? Carpal tunnel, back injuries must be common.
Very common. And the system often just discards them. If you can't keep up, you might be given deliberately unpleasant jobs or have your wages cut, basically encouraging you to quit. Injured workers slow down the line, and the line speed is paramount for profit.
It's a brutal calculus, and that exploitation is perhaps even more visible when we look at migrant farm labor.
The statistics are just horrifying. One source states the average life expectancy for a migrant farm worker in the U.S. is only 49 years. 49!
49, that's
Mhm.
unbelievable. And the conditions for something like tomato picking.
Grueling. Stooped labor, bending over constantly, leading to severe chronic back injuries. And the pay is often well below minimum wage.
How is that even legal?
It often operates through piece rate systems, getting paid per bucket picked, or by manipulating how hours are calculated. Workers might officially earn $5 or $6 an hour on paper, but that doesn't reflect the incredibly long hours they actually work, especially during harvest season. The system basically runs on the poverty and desperation of the workforce.
And this pressure to reduce labor costs is a major driver of globalization, right? Why our berries might come from Mexico instead of locally.
Absolutely. Take a big producer like Driscoll's, moving significant operations to Mexico. The primary driver was labor costs. Berry picking is incredibly labor-intensive, historically the biggest expense,
So they move to where labor is cheaper.
and where poverty is widespread, unfortunately. As one worker pointed out, the conditions can create the perfect recipe for slavery, for people just trying to survive. That's the hidden engine behind a lot of the cheap year-round produce we take for granted.
Okay, so that's the bleak picture of the industrial system, the disconnection, the hidden costs, the exploitation. But now let's shift gears. Let's talk about the reaction against that, the move towards hands-on food labor and the unexpected rewards it brings.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. It's the positive side, the joy people find, even in really hard physical work.
Barbara Kingsolver's account of her family's year of eating locally really captures this, doesn't it? She doesn't shy away from the difficulty.
Not at all. She's very honest about the exhaustion.
Mm.
She writes about late spring demanding payment for the relative quiet of January. Farmers are constantly pushing deadlines.
Yeah, she describes working past dusk, trudging through mud, so thick it made our boots as heavy as elephant feet. Honestly, that sounds pretty miserable.
It does sound grueling. But the point she makes is that the satisfaction isn't in the ease of the work, it's in the accomplishment, the connection. That physical exhaustion helps you truly appreciate why good food costs what it does. She even says it ought to cost more.
So the effort itself builds value in your mind.
Exactly. And then there are these moments of unexpected grace. She talks about feeling lucky just listening to distant thunder as the evening cools, or watching baby chickadees fledge right there in the garden. These tiny little miracles that you only witness because you're out there doing the work.
It grounds you in the natural world in a way that just buying food at the store never could.
Precisely. She says gardeners become junkies for the experience of being out there in the mud and fresh green growth. It's an addiction to that direct sensory engagement.
And we hear this echoed elsewhere, right? That idea that being outdoors, doing physical work connected to the land is just fundamentally good for us.
Yeah, there's a growing body of thought suggesting people are simply healthier, mentally and physically, when they have regular contact with the natural world and engage in this kind of elemental labor.
It flips the modern script, doesn't it? Society tells us success means escaping dirt and weather and physical effort.
It really does. But these accounts suggest that moving away from elemental concerns might be the opposite of what we actually need for well-being. We need that grounding.
You see that deep connection and knowledge in traditional farming wisdom, too. Like the saying from James Rebank's grandfather about the sheep.
Oh, that's a wonderful example. His grandfather taught him, sheep should not hear the church bells twice in the same field. Meaning they've been grazing in that one spot for too long, likely more than a week, and need to be moved to fresh pasture. It's not based on a schedule or a manual. It's based on intimate observation of the land, the animals, the local context.
Knowledge rooted in place, not in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And Rebanks describes the sheer physicality of that old way of farming, pulling huge, heavy turnips out of the cold, wet ground in winter.
Hard work.
Definitely. But he also describes how that very act immediately attracts birds, robins, and chaffinches that come down to eat the worms and grubs unearthed by pulling the turnips. And then those turnips are fed to the pregnant ewes. It's this complete integrated cycle. Human labor, soil, birds, sheep, all working together.
It's beautiful in a way, and that leads us naturally to the soil itself, the foundation of it all. Soil husbandry that sounds like serious labor.
It is, but it's accessible labor and absolutely fundamental for self-sufficiency, or even just a productive garden. Building healthy soil requires attention and effort. Composting is a great example.
Okay, break that down for us. What's the labor involved in composting?
Well, the basic principle is balancing greens and browns. Greens are nitrogen-rich things like kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, fresh grass clippings. Browns are carbon-rich, dry leaves, straw, wood chips, cardboard.
So you need both.
You absolutely need both, in roughly the right ratio. The actual labor comes in managing the pile, specifically layering. Every time you add nitrogen-rich food scraps, you need to cover them immediately with a layer of carbon-rich browns.
Why is that covering step so important?
It does a couple things. It keeps flies away and prevents bad odors, which is important for practical reasons. But crucially, it provides the carbon the microbes need to break down the nitrogen materials efficiently. It builds the structure of the compost.
And then you just... Oh, wait.
Pretty much. With this kind of passive, slow composting, once the pile is built correctly, you let the microbes, the real unseen laborers, do their work. It takes about 3 to 6 months, depending on conditions.
And the payoff for that labor, the layering, the waiting, is healthier soil.
Massively healthier soil. And this connects to something really vital but fragile. The soil microbiome, especially mycorrhizal fungi.
Okay, fungi. Tell us about those.
Think of them as these incredibly fine threads, like a massive underground network, sometimes called the internet of the soil. They form symbiotic relationships with plant roots.
Helping the plants get nutrients.
Exactly. These fungal threads extend way beyond the reach of the plant's own roots and are brilliant at extracting tightly bound micronutrients, phosphorus, copper, zinc, iron, nitrogen, and transported them back to the plant.
And this network is delicate.
Very delicate. Things like heavy tilling with a rototiller or soil compaction from walking on wet beds can just shred these fungal networks. But the labor of adding good compost inoculates the soil with beneficial microbes and fungi, helping rebuild that network.
And you can actually see the difference.
Oh yeah. Sources say that consistent composting can lead to noticeable improvements in soil structure, better drainage, better water retention, less compaction, often within just 6 months. That careful labor builds resilience right into the ground beneath your feet.
Okay, so you've put in the labor in the garden, you've nurtured the soil, you've got a harvest. Now comes the next stage of labor, preservation, turning that bounty into something that lasts.
Right. Moving from the field into the kitchen and reclaiming those skills that let you eat well beyond the growing season. This is about household resilience.
And those old cookbooks and guides you mentioned are full of these labor-intensive techniques, aren't they?
Absolutely. They document a level of meticulous effort that was just standard practice for ensuring food security through the winter or lean times.
Let's take an example, green tomato preserves. That sounds like making the best of unripe fruit.
It is, and the labor starts before the frost even hits. It's described as this late-season ritual. You go out and gather all the unripe tomatoes before that first killing frost is expected.
What do you do with them all?
Well, some of the best ones get individually wrapped in tissue paper, carefully stored in a cool, dark place, with the hope they might ripen slowly, maybe even last until Christmas to be shown off.
Like a little treasure.
And the rest? The rest get processed right away into preserves. It's a specific recipe involving cooking them down with sugar and spices.
And the result? Is it worth the effort?
Apparently, yes. The taste is described as very much like that of mild honey, especially good on a hot biscuit. It's taking something that would otherwise be lost to frost and transforming it, through careful labor, into a delicious, shelf-stable treat for winter. Something completely different from just buying jam anytime.
That makes sense. Or how about pickling? Pickled pears sound lovely, but probably quite fiddly.
Oh, the process described is incredibly delicate. It's not just chucking pears in vinegar. It involves carefully washing and paring small, whole suckle pears, then simmering them gently, not boiling, in a specific syrup of brown sugar, cloves, and vinegar.
Okay, simmering. What next?
And here's the crucial patient part. They have to set overnight in that syrup to fully absorb the flavors. The labor isn't just the act of cooking. It includes the waiting, the allowing time for infusion.
Right, patience as part of the skill.
Exactly. Then, the next morning, you lift the pears out, strain the syrup, boil it down quickly to concentrate it, put the pears back in, and then go through the whole sterilizing and canning process. It's craftsmanship, really. Detailed, time-consuming labor leading to a very specific, high-quality result.
A world away from opening a supermarket jar. And this kind of intensive, often communal labor was absolutely essential when dealing with larger harvests, like butchering an animal.
Hog butchering is the classic example. It was a major community event, not something one household typically did alone. It required everyone pitching in with specific roles.
Like what kind of roles?
Well, the sources describe the oldest, most experienced men checking the hog's readiness by, believe it or not, jerking a few hairs from its back to see if they came out easily. Young boys might be tasked with the hard work of scraping the hair off the scalded carcass using saucer-shaped scrapers.
And the women.
They often directed the process, deciding where the different cuts and organ meats should go, managing the flow of work. It was highly coordinated.
And while most of the meat was destined for preservation, salting, smoking, grinding into sausage, some parts had to be used immediately, right?
Yes, especially some of the organ meats, like sweetbreads, the thymus gland. And preparing those required immediate, skilled labor.
Fried pork sweetbreads, how were they prepared?
It wasn't simple. First, washing them carefully, then plunging them into boiling water briefly, then immediately into cold water that firms them up, then draining and drying them, then the really fiddly bit, carefully removing the outer membrane or web.
Wow, okay. That sounds tedious.
It does. Only after all that could they be sliced, then meticulously coated, usually in seasoned crumbs, then egg, then more crumbs, maybe some flour in there too, before being fried. It's a perfect example of how utilizing the whole animal required significant, immediate, skilled kitchen labor, not just the long-term preservation work.
And these skills, these food traditions, they aren't just about surviving winter. They're also powerful tools for preserving culture, especially for immigrant communities navigating a new environment.
That's such an important dimension. We see fantastic examples like Thai immigrant women in Southern California, names like Kamalmal Pudaraksa and Yupa Holsner come up. They actively work to preserve and share Thai food culture by teaching cooking classes.
Teaching Americans, often.
Often, yes. Teaching white American women, frequently. And this wasn't just about sharing recipes. It was a deliberate labor of cultural translation and diplomacy.
How so? Translation.
Well, they were strategic. They taught authentic Thai dishes using traditional techniques and ingredients where possible. But they were also pragmatic. They knew their students might not have easy access to everything.
So they suggested substitutions.
Exactly. Smart substitutions that maintained the core flavor profile. Maybe suggesting readily available jalapeno or serrano peppers if specific Thai chiles were hard to find, or recommending canned coconut milk as a practical alternative to the very laborious process of making it fresh from a coconut.
So the labor was in adapting the tradition to ensure its survival and transmission in a new context.
Precisely. It ensures the cuisine and the cultural identity embedded within it can take root and flourish, even when some ingredients change.
And these teaching activities, these cultural exchanges, often happen in specific community spaces, right?
Yes, places like the Wat Thai, the Thai Buddhist temple in Los Angeles, became crucial hubs. They'd host food festivals where the food had to be really good and affordable, cheaper than restaurants, which brought the community together.
Food as the anchor.
Absolutely. And alongside food, they offered classes in other cultural skills, like traditional sewing or the intricate art of vegetable carving. All of this activity, this shared labor and learning, had a clear goal: to preserve Thai culture and identity, especially among the younger generation growing up in suburban America. It was seen as a way to protect them from, as one source put it, the aggressive nature of American culture. Food labor as cultural defense.
So we've seen the personal satisfaction, the skill building, the cultural preservation. Now let's zoom out a bit to the community level. How does reclaiming food labor rebuild social connections and maybe even local autonomy?
This is where thinkers like Wendell Berry are so insightful. His idea of mutuality really gets at this.
Mutuality, what does he mean by that?
Berry argues that in traditional, more agrarian societies, the farm wasn't just a business. It was an economic unit that included the household. Production and consumption were tightly linked within the family structure.
Okay, that makes sense for a farm family.
But he extends it further. Even town households were often involved in food production. People had kitchen gardens, maybe kept a cow or some pigs in a pen. There was a baseline level of self-sufficiency, or at least neighborhood-level production.
So people were less dependent on distant sources.
Much less dependent. And crucially, this shared local dependence created a system of reciprocal influence. It wasn't just about everyone funding for themselves, it built community ties.
How did that reciprocity work? Did it create a kind of discipline?
Exactly. Berry calls it a discipline. Local shopkeepers, for example, knew their customers personally. They knew their tastes, their needs, maybe even their ability to pay. They were under the direct influence and discipline of the community they served.
Unlike today's anonymous supermarkets and global supply chains?
Precisely. Berry contrasts that mutuality with modern specialization, which he argues thrives on conflict and anonymity. Different parts of the system, the farmer, the processor, the retailer, the consumer, are often pitted against each other, optimizing for their own narrow gain. There's no mechanism, he says, to consider the good of the whole of creation.
That really brings us to the heart of the localism versus globalism debate, doesn't it? We're often told global supply chains are efficient and secure.
That's the standard economic line, yes. Efficiency and security through scale and distance. But the counter-argument from our sources is powerful. It says we need local food systems not just for fresher lettuce, but so we can understand it and engage with it and shape it to our values.
So it's about control and accountability, not just logistics.
Fundamentally, when your food comes from halfway around the world, produced under conditions you know nothing about, how can you ensure it aligns with your values regarding animal welfare, environmental impact, or fair labor practices? You usually can't.
Foreign-sourced food often isn't subject to the same regulations or scrutiny that domestic production might be.
That's often true. And beyond regulations, there's just that feeling of disconnection. One source calls the modern state of being disconnected from the fields and the people that feed us as totally weird from a historic perspective. Localism aims to restore that connection, that transparency, that ability to hold the system accountable. It makes food choices a civic act again.
And people aren't just talking about this, they're taking direct action to reclaim that connection, often focusing on land access itself.
Yeah, the actions of groups like the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, the NBFJA, are really striking. On Juneteenth in 2017, they organized this nationwide action.
What did they do?
They coordinated the occupation of 40 acres of vacant lots across different cities. But it wasn't just a symbolic protest. It was framed as a demand for land reparations for Black communities, combined with an immediate demonstration of what could be done with that land.
So they put the land to use right away.
Immediately. They cleaned up these often neglected trash-filled lots and turned them into temporary sites of community building. They offered free lunches, held barbecues. They showed that these weren't just empty spaces, they were potential sources of food, community wealth, and social connection. Food labor as a form of political action and community regeneration.
That power of food labor to transform neglected spaces and build community is visible in urban gardening movements too, isn't it?
Absolutely. The story of Mama Karen Washington in the Bronx is legendary. She started a community garden over 30 years ago
In a tough neighborhood.
in what she described as a war zone at the time, plagued by the crack cocaine epidemic. She took a lot filled with garbage and, through sheer effort and community organizing, turned it into a beautiful, safe space.
Centered around growing food.
Entirely centered around growing food. It became a symbol of community hope and survival. It gave people a reason to stay, to invest their labor in their own neighborhood, to literally cultivate hope from the ground up. It shows how deeply intertwined food labor is with building social capital and grassroots democracy. Hashtag outro.
You know, we started this conversation thinking about food labor as this invisible, often burdensome thing that the modern world tried to eliminate through convenience.
Yeah, something to be outsourced or automated away.
What we've really uncovered through all these stories and sources is that this labor is actually, well, it's central. It's fundamental.
Central to feeling fulfilled personally, central to keeping cultures alive and resilient,
Yeah.
and central to building strong, connected communities.
The joy isn't about avoiding work. The joy seems to come from the engagement itself, whether you're wrestling with muddy boots like Kingsolver, or meticulously following the steps for pickled pears, or working alongside neighbors in a community garden.
Right. It's the satisfaction of skill, of creation, of connection. The industrial system gained its efficiency by deliberately separating us, the eaters, from the knowledge and the process required to produce our food. And that separation leaves us feeling dependent, maybe even a bit powerless.
So reclaiming these skills, even small ones, like knowing how to make good compost, or understanding the seasonality of produce, or learning a preservation technique, it's a way of reclaiming some of that power.
Definitely. It reconnects us.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our final thought, a challenge for you, our listeners.
We mentioned Wendell Berry's idea that democracy isn't just about voting or laws, it's a way of life, where citizens actively share responsibility for making the whole community work.
So if that's true, if democracy is lived practice, what specific food labor skills do you feel you might need to reclaim?
It could be anything from learning to sharpen a knife properly, to starting a compost bin, to mastering one canning recipe, maybe learning to grow just one thing really well. What skills would help make your own household and maybe your local community a little more resilient, more connected, maybe even a little more democratic?
Something to think about. What knowledge, what labor connects you back to the source?
Yeah.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.